Before I really get into it, I should mention that I have already watched through to the end of Season 2, and will be approaching this review as such. A viewer going back and rewatching the show, in part to appreciate all the setup and foreshadowing that is constantly going on in both the foreground and the background. In particular, I want to look at the various dragon dreams and other prophetic moments presented throughout the show. It should be pretty obvious that the writing in this show is heavily influenced by George R.R. Martin's works, and one of George's favorite foreshadowing techniques is to present an obscure and sometimes obscene or grotesque prophecy. That makes little sense in the moment, but becomes completely understandable after the events have transpired. And I always thought it was fun to look back on the prophecies with the clarity of hindsight when rereading the books. In short, spoiler warnings for the entire series up to the Season 2 finale. The story officially opens with an adult Rhaenyra Targaryen describing the decision of succession made by Jaehaerys, the Conciliator Targaryen. And already with this scene we have a bit of foreshadowing going on, as the visuals of a ruined Harrenhal contrast with Rhaenyra's explanation of power and peace that the Targaryens maintain at this time. A subtle hint for the war to come, a war that will severely cripple House Targaryen. Additionally, this event isn't just happening in Harrenhal for some cheap visual. Jaehaerys is making this significant and somewhat controversial decision of succession in the same massive castle that his forebear, Aegon the Conqueror, decimated with his dragon. Jaehaerys has summoned the Lords of the Realm to the same location, where in a single night, one of the strongest ancient houses of Westeros was completely snuffed out. Next up, we get introductions for the two main characters of the series, Rhaenyra Targaryen and Alicent Hightower. And man, not only do I love all these dragon shots throughout the show, the distinctive audible and visual designs that each dragon possesses helps to give them their own unique personalities. But I also think this scene, as well as the following introductory scenes, are very effective at delivering information about Rhaenyra and Alicent in an efficient manner. The free-spirited and rebellious Rhaenyra, shirking her cupbearer duties to soar with her dragons, tearing up history books like a damn charlatan, but also showing her more tender side as she visits her pregnant mother before she returns to her official duties. And, opposite her BFF at the moment, we are also introduced to the less assuming Alicent, who we understand to be a far more dutiful and polite courtier. With that said, I'm not sure if Rhaenyra and Alicent having this casual conversation about history in the Godswood is important enough to warrant the location. In the books, the Godswood is both the location where Ned confronts Cersei about the lineage of her children, and the place where Sansa conspires with Dantos. Both very significant and secretive events for the story that follows. And if those secrets became common knowledge, it could completely change the course of the story. Again, I think the scene works fine for character introductions, but I can't think of any reason why you would justify this minor event taking place in front of a heart tree. It almost feels like the show is just saying, hey, we're gonna include a lot more of the magic than the main series. Which, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love. And there is much better heart tree content to come in the next season. This visual just felt a little forced. The court scene itself, where Rhaenyra is meant to be cupbearer, I think works as a very good beginning outline for the characters of Viserys Targaryen, Otto Hightower, and the sea snake himself, Corlys Velaryon. In this scene, Corlys warns of the potential danger that is brewing in the Stepstones, as the Free Cities have formed a triarchy that is creating a significant foothold on this mass of rocky islands located off the coast of Dorne, a very strategic location that could disrupt trade throughout Westeros. Meanwhile, King Viserys shows little concern for this threat, even cutting Corlys off when Rhaenyra finally arrives. The king is far more interested in the tourney he is planning for his new child, and notably, the discussion of the triarchy is finally put to an end, not by the king, but by Otto Hightower. Moving on, we are finally introduced to Daemon Targaryen, the Rogue Prince. Defiant as always, we meet the Targaryen prince sitting atop the throne that he is convinced will pass to him. Additionally, The fact that the Targaryen heir chooses to communicate mainly in Valyrian, along with the Valyrian steel necklace gift bestowed upon Rhaenyra, shows the audience that Daemon is someone who takes his lineage quite seriously. As a quick aside, I fully support the new design of the Iron Throne. Truth be told, the jagged structure of the throne has its importance, as it is supposed to cut those who sit upon it, symbolically to represent the kings who lack the worthiness for the position. In the books, Jaime talks about how the Mad King was always covered in scabs and wounds he received from the throne. And interestingly, in this scene we discover a recent wound that Viserys has received from the throne is currently festering, which we know will eventually lead to the king's slow and agonizing demise. A king who is leading a relatively peaceful, if not somewhat complacent, rule. I don't think the show or the previous Game of Thrones show has really established the symbolic meaning of being cut by the throne, so rather than being completely unworthy of the position, I took Viserys' wound and progressive deterioration throughout Season 1 as more of a symbolic representation of his own indecisive nature. The man eventually dying from this tiny wound that he never took seriously. And despite his best efforts to maintain the peace, the position of king is slowly killing him. Meanwhile, Otto stresses to the Maester that the king's ailment must not become publicly known. Looping back to the subject of the Iron Throne, the throne is meant to be a reminder to the realm of the power of the Targaryens. A mangled mass of ugly steel made from the many highborn houses that have submitted to the rule of the dragon. There is an argument to be made that Bobby B had his chair changed for comfort reasons in the original Game of Thrones TV series, but nah, I think that's a flimsy excuse at best. In hindsight, it's more clear that the showrunners really didn't care as much about their series, even in those early seasons. And details like the Iron Throne were more or less ignored, just like how they didn't have Cersei and Ned having their big conversation in front of a heart tree, or Ned's fever dream about the Tower of Joy, or Bran awakening his third eye while in his coma state, or the many dragon dreams that Dany has before her own spiritual awakening. Just various elements of the story that, when removed, helps kill the magic that heavily dictates the events taking place in the world of ice and fire.
Timmy. Timmy. Jimmy. No, Timmy. 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 Jimmy. Timmy. Timmy. Oh, Timmy. Timmy. Ah. Jimmy. 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 Timmy. 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 Jimmy. 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 Timmy. Level out, Timmy. Yeah.
Continuing on with the matter of magic, there's a brief scene between Viserys and Queen Aemma Arryn in which the king proclaims that he has had a dream about his son that will eventually be born to him. In the dream, he hears the sound of thundering hooves, splintering shields, ringing swords, the bells of the sept, and the dragons crying in unison as his son ascends the Iron Throne. But we as viewers through Season 2 know that this is a prophecy describing the War of Ascension to come, while the bells that Viserys hears are ringing out to announce his own death. Also, in this scene we learn that Aemma has already lost 5 children after Rhaenyra, and announces that this will be the last time she endures childbirth. Hard cut to the next scene of Daemon rousing his gold cloaks to enact what he perceives as justice. And this scene probably best exemplifies my biggest problem with this show. Personally, I find a lot of these action scenes to just be clunky in terms of pacing, and in general very heavy-handed. I'll grant it does the job of displaying the cruelty that Daemon demonstrates, as well as the fervent loyalty that the Gold Cloaks display towards their wild creator. Additionally, I think the next scene further utilizes the previous quite well. However, this abrupt nature of editing is something I would more expect to see in a comedy or an MCU product, or even a YouTube video. Just not in what is supposed to be, in part, a well-paced political drama. But as I said, I do like how they use the Gold Cloak's escapades in the following council scene. Otto immediately takes action against Daemon, who enjoys angering the normally calm hand of the king. All the while, Viserys is trying to calm the growing courtroom calamity, playing off Daemon's cruel actions as a minor mistake in an attempt to maintain order for the upcoming tourney. Additionally, we learn that Corlys supports Daemon in his gold cloaks, agreeing with the sentiment presented by the Rogue Prince. Next up, some mandatory HBO TNA. Here we meet Miss Arya, aka Misery the White Worm. Misery is not a terrible character, and she does have a significant role for the story to come, but her scenes grow increasingly contrived as the series progresses. I will say, the scene between her and Daemon does give me a little hope for the future. She dotes on him in the same way she does Rhaenyra in Season 2, and technically she does eventually betray Daemon when the king dies and the succession war begins. So maybe all the BS with her and Rhaenyra is building to a significant betrayal or character turn, but that's an even longer diatribe, best saved for a more appropriate episode. Cause now it's jousting time, and the big scene that really got people talking about this show in the first place. The tourney for the new potential Targaryen princeling. I think that this scene boasts a wonderful set design, interesting camera work, respectable choreography, fantastic acting, and some great character moments. I do think that the scene stumbles just a bit when one of the jousts turns into a massive brawl and ends in bloody murder. The dialogue between Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was, and Corlys is meant to cover these actions. Rhaenys, a Targaryen who lived through the War of Maegor the Cruel, basically proclaims that these tourney deaths were inevitable at some point, as these times of peace have left the knights hungry for real battle, not understanding what it truly entails, while Corlys questions if a tourney is even appropriate for the celebration of a new life. Again, just a bit heavy-handed. In saying that we're lucky that war hasn't already broken out doesn't really cover up such a severe tourney blunder in my eyes. That said, I love the overall dichotomy that the scene eventually devolves into, as needless bloodshed brought about by the tourney is cleverly interplayed with the more intimate battle that Aemma and by proxy Viserys are enduring in the birthing bed. And with the sound of thundering hooves, splintering shields, and ringing swords going on in the tourney grounds, Viserys chooses to have his maester perform a C-section that may save the baby, but will definitely kill his wife. Tragically, both battles end in a loss for House Targaryen, as Daemon fails to best the Kingmaker and Viserys loses half his family. To be honest, this scene left me with a very visceral feeling in my gut, and I think that is something that good media should do to its audience. But before all the doom and gloom, we get some great character work when Daemon chooses Gwaine Hightower, Otto's son and Alicent's brother, as his first opponent for the list. And Daemon, that prick of a prince, wins the tilt in a very unsportsmanlike manner. Even after making a fool of her brother, Daemon convinces Alicent to give him her favor, helping to establish that at this age, Alicent has a bit of a crush on the Rogue Prince. Speaking of crushes, this scene also introduces us to Sir Criston Cole, the Kingmaker, who hails from a very small house residing in the Dornish Marches, and, after defeating the Rogue Prince, wins the favor of the Dragon Princess. Additionally, when news comes of Queen Aemma's birthing complications, it is notable to point out that the maesters first delivered the news to the Hand, not the king himself. Not necessarily important for the matter at hand, but a nice subtle detail that highlights the current power dynamics of the kingdom. The indecisiveness of Viserys is further exemplified in the following scene, as it falls on his daughter to complete the Targaryen death ceremony of being consigned to the fire. It should also be noted that Daemon is not unaware of the suffering his brother is experiencing. Immediately after the pain procession, our boy Otto wastes no time in planting seeds of doubt into the king's mind about his brother. And in the following scenes, it's portrayed that he absolutely brought this up to push his daughter into the position of queen and into the king's own bed. A king who is still very much mourning the loss of his wife. The current succession law would place Daemon as king should Viserys die, a law that Corlys initially supports. Though, when Otto suggests naming Rhaenyra as the king's successor, Corlys quickly changes sides to support his own wife. All the while, Lord Lionel Strong is there to outright contest the idea of naming any female heir. And caught up in all this unnecessary clamor is Viserys, who is far more concerned with his personal family matters than the matter of succession. And we see that the man does have his limits when pushed too far. Daemon's also creeping in the background, listening in on the whole thing, which does feel a bit contrived for an otherwise wonderful scene. In response, while in the midst of his brother's despair, Daemon is off partying, though he does seem initially reluctant to celebrate. But after getting reaffirmed from the tan worm, he proceeds with a very cruel toast to his dead nephew. After learning of this news directly from his hand, the king summons his brother to the Iron Throne while brandishing the sword of the Conqueror in order to deliver the news of his new heir, Rhaenyra Targaryen. Interestingly, this is the same figure that Viserys presents before the realm when he's demanding fealty to his new female heir from some reluctant-looking lords. As usual, this important demonstration of Targaryen succession in this feudal world is handled as a bit of a half-measure by the more family-driven king, while Rhaenyra remains resigned to a role she never thought she would have. And if anyone was waiting for that big hook to draw the audience into the long night, the massive magical element that overshadows all the political intrigue, then fear not, you fellow like-minded obsessive nerds. It has officially been confirmed. Located in a hidden Targaryen chamber that very much resembles the one that Arya stumbles into in the first book. While she is chasing cats throughout the Red Keep, Viserys informs Rhaenyra that Aegon started his conquest in preparation for the long night. We learn that the Targaryens are heavily driven by dreams, describing the war to come, that their goal is to unite Westeros under a single banner to contest the upcoming undead apocalypse. Overall, I do think this series is a bit of a downgrade from Game of Thrones, seasons 1 through 4 at least, but that in no way should suggest that this show is bad. Quite the contrary in my opinion. While season 2 does drop off a little, I still find the quality of the show to be fine, and I think this first season of House of the Dragon makes for some legitimately compelling storytelling. In this massive desert of boring, dried-up media, such as a certain new Star Wars show, House of the Dragon is a welcoming little oasis, and I would highly recommend the series to anyone who enjoys content covering the world of Ice and Fire. Personally, I fell off from the main series after season 5 completely butchered several of my favorite characters, yet I still cling to the books like a heroin addict trying to get his fix. And let's be real, even season 4 screwed things up a bit. The Tysha backstory is a critical plot point for both the Lannister brothers, and removing that element does a huge disservice for both characters' motivations moving forward. So, before House of the Dragon even premiered, I was highly skeptical that HBO could deliver on the goods. But lo and behold, I thought that season 1, episode 1 of House of the Dragon was surprisingly satiating, and I currently remain hopeful for the story to come.
How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man?
I love the young people.